Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, you've challenged us with something, well, something a little different.
It's definitely a departure.
Yeah, instead of our usual spreadsheets or, historical archives, you've sent us source material that is purely philosophical.
It is. We're looking at excerpts from a structured dialogue called Symphony of Love.
And what that means is we are trading the analysis of external facts for an interrogation of internal concepts.
Exactly. This isn't a deep dive into data. It's more like a stress test of the very mechanism by which we think. We're looking at the architecture of our own understanding.
And the sources, they lay out this incredibly audacious claim right from the very beginning.
They really do.
They argue that every single foundational idea we rely on, things like freedom, security, even the basic law of identity, that each of them contains the seed of its own opposite.
So here's the central hypothesis we're testing today, and it's a big one. If we take an idea to its ultimate purified conclusion, we inevitably arrive at its exact opposite.
In other words, all ideas are paradoxes.
So our mission really is to get beyond just, agreeing or disagreeing with that. We have to unpack the precise philosophical and logical mechanisms that are supposed to force this collapse.
We need to test this theory on concepts that we usually consider, well, irrefutably true, and just see what's left standing when that simple binary logic of A or not A can't hold the tension anymore.
It feels like we're being asked to use logic to break logic.
We're essentially using the tool to dismantle itself, yeah. Hoping to find something more solid on the other side. Okay, let's unpack this.
So to really get a grip on the paradoxes that come later, we first have to understand the supposed structural flaw in definition itself.
The source material lays this out pretty clearly.
It does. The dialogue identifies at least two distinct interlocking mechanisms that it claims drive this inevitable collapse of any idea.
And the first one they outline is called the necessity of the opposite. Or, another name for it is the boundary of definition. It sounds almost like a law of thermodynamics, but for concepts.
That's a really good analogy, actually. It speaks to that mutual dependence. The core insight is that to define X, you have to create a border.
Right. You have to draw a line in the sand.
Right.
This is X, and that over there is not X.
Exactly. And the source's key point is that the border itself, that line, belongs equally to both sides. It's shared territory.
Okay, so if I try to define up, I must, by definition, also be defining down. They're two sides of the same coin.
You can't have one without the other.
If I define inside, I'm simultaneously carving out a concept of outside, the two ideas. They share that intellectual border. They're mutually dependent.
Precisely. You cannot conceptually have a meaningful idea of truth unless the possibility of falsehood exists to give it shape. The identity of any concept is tethered to its negation by this shared boundary.
And that means you can never truly isolate it.
You can't. And that leads directly to the second mechanism, which is less about the static definition and more about motion, about aspiration. The sources call this one the trajectory of extremes.
This is the active part. This is the pursuit of purity, the attempt to take X and scrub away every last little trace of not X.
And the source is very clear that this isn't about finding a happy medium. It's not about compromise.
Yeah.
This is about the structural integrity of the concept collapsing precisely because it achieves that perfect isolation.
So the motion towards absolute purity is actually what accelerates the idea toward its opposite.
Yes, because once it's pure, the concept loses the necessary contrast that defined it in the first place.
Let me see if I get this. So if the concept of light achieves absolute purity, no shadows, no darkness, not even memory of darkness, just pervasive eternal light, then the concept of light actually stops having any meaning. It just becomes the undifferentiated background. It's indistinguishable from just everything, or maybe even nothing.
You've hit it, exactly. The definition needs the boundary, and the pursuit of purity is an attempt to erase the boundary.
Oh.
So the idea, pushed to its absolute limit, devours itself.
It becomes a conceptual singularity.
It does. It loses its distinct attributes. And this systemic tendency, it's not a new idea. It's been observed across history, and the source highlights a very specific term for it.
And that term is magnificent. It's Enantiodromia.
Enantiodromia. Literally translated, it means running counter to.
Running counter to.
It's the tendency of anything, a state of affairs, a character trait, a philosophical stance, to change into its opposite over time, especially when it's pushed to a zealous extreme.
Okay, let's pause on that for a second. How is enantiodromia different from just simul irony? Or, a historical cycle where things swing back and forth? Is the source claiming the idea of purity is fundamentally self-defeating no matter what? Or is this just about, humans messing up the implementation?
That is the core difference. Irony suggests an unexpected twist. Enantiodromia suggests a structural necessity. It's not about human error, it's about the design of the concept itself.
So it's baked in from the start.
It's baked in. Its origin is with the Greek philosopher Heraclitus, who saw the constant flux of the cosmos, life and death, war and peace, as this dynamic unity of opposites. For him, the struggle was the balance.
So when you try to eliminate one side of that struggle,
You destabilize the entire system. You guarantee a collapse.
and the source mentions that Carl Jung popularized this term again in the 20th century, applying it psychologically.
He did, yes. In Jungian psychology, it describes the mechanism where a conscious attempt to live only one extreme of the psyche, let's say perfect rationality, leads to the accumulation and eventual eruption of its repressed, unconscious opposite.
So, irrationality, raw emotion, destructive impulses.
The attempt at purity creates the very internal pressure that guarantees the eventual collapse into what you were trying to avoid.
Okay, so if a government, for example, attempts to create a completely rational, hyper-efficient, machine-like bureaucracy, the very act of suppressing all that human intuition, emotion, inefficiency creates this massive unconscious vacuum.
And that vacuum must eventually manifest itself. Maybe as an irrational breakdown, or a cultural hysteria, or even an obsessive, unreasoning faith in the system itself, which is its own kind of irrationality.
That's precisely the kind of example the source suggests. The system of rational purity collapses not because of some external threat, but because it structurally requires the tension provided by its opposite to exist.
Which confirms the hypothesis. The pursuit of 100% A contains the necessary guarantee of the arrival of not A.
Okay, so now that we've established the mechanics, the boundary of definition, and the trajectory of extremes, we have to test them. We have to test them on the big ideas that structure our shared reality.
And the sources move from theory to practical application here. They give us 3 really critical case studies.
We begin with case study 1, freedom. And this is maybe the most intensely debated social concept there is.
It has to be.
So the setup, as the dialogue defines it, is the pursuit of absolute, unrestricted liberty for everyone. No laws, no restrictions, just the ability for every single individual to do exactly what they desire without any external consequence or limitation.
The trajectory here is, well, it's swift and brutal. Because as soon as you remove all the external structural limitations, you are simply replacing them with individual chaotic limitations.
Right.
The source material notes that without laws, without restrictions, chaos just ensues. This is the classic Hobbesian state of nature, but we're viewing it through the lens of this philosophical collapse.
So the moment everyone is absolutely free, the only constraint left becomes physical power.
It makes right.
The strong dominate the weak. And the very definition of freedom morphs from the ability to act intentionally to something more like the ability to survive the actions of others.
It becomes a negative freedom. So for a weaker individual, the attempt to exercise their absolute freedom, say the freedom to cultivate a small plot of land, is immediately negated by a stronger individual's absolute freedom to just take that land.
So the centralized violence of the state, which is a form of not freedom,
Right.
Necessary constraint, it's traded for decentralized, random, and constant violence.
Exactly. And here's the paradox, the flip. The pursuit of total, unrestricted liberty ultimately results in no freedom at all for anyone except the absolute tyrant.
And even the tyrant isn't truly free. They have to dedicate all of their energy, all of their time to constantly protecting their power.
It's a devastating critique of purified idealism. The source suggests that freedom, when you define it purely as the absence of constraint, annihilates itself. It fails to protect the very capacity for freedom.
So it requires the not freedom, governance, law, restraint to secure its own existence.
It does.
The dialogue implies that any social structure that wants to maximize freedom has to, paradoxically, start by implementing constraints. It's a necessary trade-off. But I want to challenge this a bit. Couldn't you argue that the collapse into tyranny is just a failure of human nature and not a structural failure of the idea of freedom itself?
That's a really important distinction to make. And the sources would argue it is a structural failure of the idea when it's purified.
Okay.
If the idea of freedom is defined as no restraint, And if the absence of restraint inherently and logically leads to the domination of the physically strongest, then the idea itself, when taken to its logical extreme, negates its desired outcome.
It collapses on the philosophical flaw of ignoring the necessity of the boundary.
So the collapse is inevitable, not just circumstantial. It's built into the operating system of the concept.
Precisely. Which brings us to the inverse concept, case study 2, security. If the extreme of liberty fails, what about the extreme of control?
Right, so the setup here is pursuing security to its absolute ultimate conclusion, the total removal of all risk, all uncertainty, all accidents, all perceived danger from the environment.
A perfect bubble.
A perfect bubble. And to eliminate risk perfectly, you have to eliminate all the variables. As the source material notes, this requires controlling every movement, every interaction, every external threat.
Which means comprehensive surveillance. Total control over the environment and everyone in it.
And that trajectory leads directly to the loss of privacy, of dignity, of autonomy. The moment you need a total comprehensive security apparatus to monitor and control every potential deviation, you've already sacrificed the subjective feeling of safety.
Because you're living under constant enforced scrutiny.
Think about the modern surveillance state and just take that to its ultimate extreme. If every keystroke, every conversation, every purchase, and every location is logged and analyzed to preempt threats.
You're perfectly safe from external random threats, like terrorism or street crime.
You are. But you have paid the highest possible price for that safety.
Which brings us to the paradox, the flip. Absolute security requires living in a perfect, inescapable prison, even if it's a gilded one. And that leads to absolute vulnerability to the controller.
Yes. The source is highlighting that the very means you use to achieve security, which is absolute control, inherently become the greatest threat.
You've eliminated 1,000 random threats from the outside world.
The not security of the external world.
Only to consolidate all existential risk into a single omnipotent point of failure. The entity holding the keys to the prison.
And if that controller is compromised or corrupt or even just incompetent, your security instantly vanishes. And you have no means of resistance, no means of escape, because you willingly dismantled your own autonomy to get that security in the first place.
The purified idea of security demands the elimination of all potential risks. But in doing so, it creates a risk far greater than any single accident, a systemic, unavoidable catastrophe dictated by the system itself.
It's the ultimate structural failure. What's fascinating here is that the idea of security collapses not because it fails to keep you safe from the outside, but because in eliminating the outside threats, it creates an absolute, singular, and internal threat.
The isolation of the idea, the effort to purify security from all risk, makes the concept fatally brittle.
It does, by consolidating all power.
So let's internalize this. We've seen the social failure. Now let's look at the foundation of inquiry itself. Case study 3, skepticism. This moves us from the social to the intellectual.
Right. The setup here is an individual who takes skepticism to its ultimate conclusion. The systematic, comprehensive doubt of everything. Refusing to accept any premise, any assumption, any external data point as a given.
The trajectory of this journey? It seems like it would have to be circular.
It is. If you doubt all external claims, you're forced to rely solely on the one thing you're using, the process of doubt itself.
And the sources detail that eventually you have to turn the lens of doubt onto its own foundation.
You enter an infinite regress of doubt. If I doubt X, why do I trust the mechanism I'm using to doubt? But if I doubt the mechanism of doubt, then I can't validate my initial doubt of X in the first place.
It's what philosophers sometimes call the Münchhausen trilemma, right? Every foundation needs more proof, which leads you to either going in circles and infinite regress or just stopping arbitrarily.
Exactly. An absolute skeptic cannot claim nothing is true because that statement is itself a truth claim, the truth that nothing is true.
So they're forced to rely on one unproven, undoubted assumption.
That the process of doubt is the correct way to approach reality.
And there's the paradox, the flip. Absolute skepticism, when you pursue it rigorously, collapses back into a form of faith, or just total intellectual paralysis.
The faith is in the skeptical process itself, accepting it as the ultimate, unquestionable truth, which is an internal contradiction. Or the individual is just paralyzed, unable to move past square one because they can't even rely on their own conceptual framework.
This is genuinely powerful, whether we're looking at external governance like freedom and security, or an internal methodology like skepticism. The moment we try to purify an idea by eliminating all of its counter-elements,
The idea flips into its opposite.
the paradox is the rule, not the exception.
And so Having witnessed this systemic collapse of social concepts, the source material takes us to the truly challenging ground.
Oh, this is the deep end.
This is a deep end. We're now testing the very laws of thought that underpin all of Western reasoning. If our hypothesis is true, even these bedrock axioms have to collapse under purification.
And it starts with the most fundamental law of all, the law of identity. A.
The cornerstone.
Absolutely. If an apple is not an apple, or if one is not equal one, then all logic, all science, all communication just fails instantly.
So we have to rigorously commit to the ultimate conclusion here. If A must be perfectly, eternally, and completely A, then it cannot tolerate any intrusion of not A. We are performing a kind of metaphysical surgery, isolating A from the entire flow of existence.
Okay. And the sources list the things that must be forbidden for this purity to be maintained. And this is where the argument gets really heavy.
So first, we have to forbid change.
Right. If A is the perfect idea of A at time t1, and it changes even slightly to become A prime at time t2, then it's no longer identical to the original A.
If the idea of you includes your current mood, your location, the specific molecules in your body, the moment your heart beats, you are a new you. A truly pure A has to be immutable.
Which means we also have to forbid time.
We have to. To exist in time is to undergo entropy, movement, becoming. If A is caught in the flow of time, it's constantly changing, which means A is constantly becoming not N, even if it's subtle.
So for A to be perfectly A, it has to exist outside of all causality, outside of all flux, frozen in an eternal perfect state.
And most critically, we have to forbid interaction.
Because if A interacts with B, then A is affected by B. It might absorb light from B, or exert gravity on B, or just occupy a shared space.
If A is truly purely itself, it cannot tolerate being affected by B, because then A becomes in some small way a function of B. A must be totally isolated from the entire universe. It can't cast a shadow, can't make a sound, can't register in any way at all.
The isolation is now complete. The idea of A is this static, eternal, non-interacting entity that exists outside of time and change.
And here's the profound paradox, the flip. A thing that is utterly static, that never changes, never moves, and never interacts with anything, is fundamentally indistinguishable from nothingness.
From non-existence.
Yes.
Wow. Just wow. The attempt to define something perfectly, to isolate as pure identity, forces its annihilation.
It suggests that existence itself is defined by the very integration of not A.
The source makes this staggering point that identity has to be a dynamic process. You, the listener, are only you because you are constantly taking in not your air, food, information, and integrating it, only to discard it and renew yourself again.
The moment that dynamic integration of difference stops.
The perfect static A you've achieved isn't an identity, it's a null set. It's nothing.
It shatters the very notion of a fixed static identity. We aren't fixed nouns, we are ongoing verbs. And the philosophical conclusion is that the grade of purity metaphysical isolation results in the ultimate opposite, non-existence.
And we see the same structural failure when we apply this desire for purity to legal systems, moving from abstract identity to applied governance.
Yes, the source provides the secondary test here, absolute justice.
This draws on that old Roman legal maxim,
Yeah.
summa meus, summa iuria.
The highest law is the highest injustice.
So the setup is enforcing rules perfectly, with rigid, isolated adherence to the letter of the law, no exceptions.
If the rule is the absolute truth, then context, motive, and human consequence, they all have to be ignored. The ultimate conclusion of this rigid application is a system that is perfectly logical, but utterly monstrous.
Yeah, and let's go beyond the classic example of stealing bread. Imagine a complex bureaucratic regulation, say a safety standard for a small business application.
Yeah.
If the law requires 5 specific forms submitted in blue ink by 5:00 p.m. on Tuesday, and a small business owner submits 4 forms in blue ink and the 5th in black ink, and they arrive at 5:01 p.m.
Absolute justice demands the rejection of the entire application.
Right, and that could cost the owner their livelihood, the jobs of their employees, everything.
So the perfectly just application of the rule, which was designed to ensure fairness and standard practice, achieves the exact opposite. It creates immense unnecessary cruelty and economic devastation.
The failure isn't that the law itself is bad. It's that the isolation of the idea of justice, as just adherence to text, from the idea of equity, as fairness and outcome, it destroys the entire moral purpose of the system.
So perfect justice, when it's stripped of all context and mercy, becomes monstrous cruelty, perfect injustice. The paradox is complete because the pursuit of that textual purity eliminates the very reason the law was created in the first place: human flourishing.
If we connect this back to the bigger picture, the source is arguing that ideas, whether they're abstract like identity or applied like justice, they require the tension of their opposites to stay functional.
Identity needs change. Justice needs mercy. To isolate the idea is to condemn it to self-destruction.
The journey so far has revealed that every idea, when you purify it, it collapses into its opposite. It breaks the law of identity, A-I-A-A, Tyranny. Now, the dialogue pushes even further.
It does. It now challenges the very last standing rule of rational thought, the law of non-contradiction.
The idea that A cannot be both true and false at the same time, if we break this, the entire foundation just shatters.
This section absolutely has to introduce the concept of the strange loop. This is the mechanism the source uses to break that non-contradiction principle.
Okay, so what's a strange loop?
A strange loop happens when, in moving upwards or downwards through some kind of hierarchical system, you unexpectedly find yourself right back where you started.
And the scenario they use is designed to create this loop. It's called the man, the brain, and the cosmos. We're forced to consider two premises about location and scale at the same time.
And we really need to debate these two premises because the tension between them is where the logic breaks down.
Okay, let's start with premise A, externalism, materialism. This is the common sense scientific view. The brain is a physical object, a mass of neurons, weighs a few pounds, and it's contained inside a skull. That skull, and therefore the brain, resides inside the vast 13.8 billion-year-old physical cosmos.
Right. The cosmos is the undeniable container. The brain is the small, fragile content. By any measure of objective physical scale, cosmos is greater than brain.
That's irrefutable. Based on physical observation, yes. But now we bring in premise B, internalism, idealism.
And this is the twist. The source points out that the man, the conscious observer, only knows the cosmos through the sensations and concepts processed by that brain.
The stars, the concepts of billions of years, the very notion of space and time, all of these are just patterns of electrochemical firing inside the brain.
Therefore, in terms of conscious reality, the conceptual cosmos, the only one the man actually experiences, is entirely contained within the brain.
So in this view, the brain is the conceptual container, and the cosmos is the content. By this perceived conceptual scale, brain is greater than cosmos.
And now we've arrived at the cognitive agony of the paradox of location.
The man's brain is a tiny physical object contained within the cosmos.
Yet the cosmos he knows is conceptually contained within that tiny physical object.
The container is contained within the very thing it contains.
It's an intellectual whiplash. The boundary just vanishes. We define the universe, but the universe defines us defining it. The man is holding the universe inside his skull, while at the same time being a tiny fragment floating inside the universe he perceives.
And this leads directly to the breakdown of binary logic. The source asks the critical question that forces the contradiction. Is the cosmos larger than the brain?
And the answer, based on premise A, on materialism, objective fact, is unequivocally yes.
Of course. The cosmos spans billions of light years. The brain is only inches across. That is a true statement.
But the answer, based on premise B, on internalism, conceptual reality, is no.
Because the very concept of larger than, the entire system of geometry and measurement and dimension that lets us calculate the size of the cosmos, is generated by the brain.
The brain encompasses the map, the concept of size, that it then uses to measure the territory, the cosmos. In the world of concepts, the framework holds the content.
So the statement, the cosmos is larger than the brain, is demonstrably true and false at the same time. It just depends on whether the observer privileges physical scale or conceptual containment.
And the source material argues that this loop is not some error in calculation. It is a fundamental truth about reality. A is not a day.
That the division we rely upon for sanity, the separation between observer and observed, container and contained, is an illusion sustained only by refusing to follow the logical path to its inevitable contradictory conclusion.
So if we accept this breakdown, if we accept that A is not A, then the entire structure of separated concepts has to fail. The individual idea A collapses into its opposite, not A, and the fundamental law separating them, the law of non-contradiction, breaks.
The destination of pure logic is the destruction of division itself.
It's the great philosophical cul-de-sac. We've used our tools to prove that our tools don't work for defining ultimate reality.
This transition from the deep structural collapse we just went through to the resolution in this next section feels like the most crucial shift in the entire dialogue.
It is.
We have basically proven that the language of division ideas, definitions, logic laws, it can't hold up to ultimate scrutiny. So, if division fails, what's left?
The dialogue pivots entirely. Since division has been shown to be an illusion, we have to admit that existence is truly boundless, which is just another way of saying it's infinite.
Right. If there is no boundary between A and not A, there can be no boundary to the totality of things.
But the source immediately recognizes a second paradox inside the infinite.
Which is, if existence is boundless, how can anything finite exist? How can I, this finite fragment, be here thinking about it?
This is the cosmic paradox. And the dialogue introduces this idea that the infinite, being boundless, cannot identify itself because identification requires a boundary.
So the infinite has to use the concept of zero, finiteness, the ego, the individual fragment, as a kind of mask to see itself.
And the ultimate question then becomes, who is doing the identification? If existence is indivisible, then the who looking out of your eyes cannot be a separate fragment.
The observer isn't a piece of the totality. The observer is the totality, temporarily playing a game of self-limitation. The seer is the seen.
The source states that the one asking, who am I, is the infinite itself, hiding inside the concept of zero, which is the finite self. This creates the ultimate loop. The container, the cosmos, and the content, the brain, are both just focal points for the same underlying universal awareness.
Okay, so this brings us to the search for the foundation that doesn't collapse.
Yeah.
If every idea flips into its opposite, what is the one constant that can't be negated?
We have to look past the concepts to the very act of knowing itself. The source asks, what can stop awareness being aware?
And the answer, after all this rigorous demolition, is, well, it's simple and it's undeniable.
Nothing.
Nothing.
To notice that awareness has stopped, you would have to be aware of that cessation. Even the concept of nothingness, of non-existence, requires a presence, an awareness, to observe it. The moment you are aware of emptiness, you are present.
So awareness is self-validating. It doesn't need any external proof.
And that makes awareness the fundamental constant. It's the bedrock beneath all of these paradoxes. It's the unmoving ground upon which this entire philosophical storm has been taking place.
The source has this beautiful analogy for it. Awareness is the screen on which the movie the universe plays. The movie contains every possible drama, fire, death, birth, struggle, paradox. But the screen is completely untouched by the film. It doesn't burn when the film shows fire. It's not born, and it doesn't die when the actors do. The awareness remains the constant substrate.
And this leads to the source's commentary on the whole philosophical process itself. We've used words, definitions, logical steps, all of which are ideas that have proven to be inherently paradoxical and self-limiting.
And the source calls the entire dialogue a pointer.
Yes. Words and philosophical structures are described as limits, or little prisons of meaning. Or, the classic one, a finger pointing at the moon.
They're useful tools for direction, but they are not the destination itself.
And here's the danger. The final paradox of the journey. Staring at the finger, at the words, the intense logical systems, the philosophical treatise itself, and completely missing the moon.
So the rigorous attempt to define reality through concepts becomes the very obstacle to experiencing reality directly.
The entire journey, this difficult struggle through the collapse of freedom and the breakdown of identity, was necessary to break the pointer. By following the hypothesis that all ideas are paradoxes to its ultimate conclusion, we shattered the concepts of separation and contradiction.
And when the words fail, when the logic breaks, what's left is the simple, luminous, silent fact of existence, which the source just calls just this.
The journey was an idea that destroyed itself to reveal the starting point. The logical destination, non-duality, proves that the struggle through logic was necessary, but at the same time also meaningless.
Because we never actually left to start with.
We never left. And this realization of universal, indivisible awareness leads directly to the final, most essential conclusion of the source material: love as a mode of knowing.
And this redefines love completely. It moves it away from just being an emotion or an attachment.
Right. The source posits that the fundamental nature of this universal awareness is its capacity to flow.
And the source suggests that the capacity, this single universal awareness, to flow into other seemingly separate focal points, to shift its focus and become the inner witness of the thing, is what we call love.
So to truly know something is not to stand separate from it and analyze it, which is logic,
but to dissolve the intellectual boundary and just be it, which is love.
This gives us the ultimate equation, the one that overrides the law of non-contradiction in the realm of experience. Logic says A is not B. It requires separation for definition.
But love says A is B. It's the dissolution of that false boundary.
Love is the felt experience of non-duality. It's the recognition that the witness looking out of your eyes is the same witness looking out of the eyes of a person you might disagree with, or a star, or a stone.
The source uses a final, brilliant analogy for synthesis here. The lamps are all different. A man, a bird, a star, a complex idea. The shapes, the intensity, the locations are all varied.
But the electricity is the same. The current flowing through all of them is the universal witness. And the entire purpose of existence is for that current to experience itself and recognize itself in a trillion different forms.
So the grand purpose is revealed through this philosophical sequence. Idea, paradox, silence, awareness, love.
The infinite falls in love with itself from a trillion different perspectives. It has been a complex, difficult, but ultimately complete journey that moves us from the rigorous demolition of logic to the simple, profound realization of unity.
So what does this all mean? We started by taking a wrecking ball to these fundamental, purified concepts like freedom, security, and fixed identity.
And proving their necessary collapse into their opposites.
We shattered the law of non-contradiction using that inescapable strange loop of the brain and the cosmos.
But we didn't end in nihilism. That systematic breakdown was just the necessary process for revealing the indivisible constant awareness.
And we identified the ultimate function of that constant, the capacity to recognize and flow into other aspects of itself as love, defined not as an emotion, but as a mode of knowing.
The dialogue ends, but the awareness remains. The final, perfect paradox to summarize this whole deep dive is the source's closing statement.
Yes and no. Yes, we have arrived, and no, because we have never left to start with. The destination is the realization that we were always here.
And that realization is the end of the journey of ideas, but it's the beginning of the application of insight.
And for you, the learner, consider this provocative thought as you move forward with the rest of your day. If the source defines love as the capacity to enter another's focal point of awareness, what does that imply for your daily interactions?
Particularly with people or situations you currently define as not you.
And if the witness is universal, what fragmented, isolated perspective are you currently pretending to be? And how does that change your definition of self-interest?
Reflect on that and allow the concepts that we broke down today to continue to shatter the walls of division.
Thank you for going on this deep dive into the nature of everything. We'll see you next time.